Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining us today for this event in recognition of the International Day of Zero Tolerance for Female Genital Mutilation. Female genital mutilation or cutting, or as it's known as FGMC, includes all procedures that involve altering or injuring the female genitalia for non-medical reasons and is recognized internationally and in the United States as a violation of human rights, a form of gender-based violence, and a threat to the health and the integrity of girls and women everywhere. With evidence that FGMC is being practiced in over 92 countries, including the US, it is a global problem that transcends geographical, racial, religious, and cultural boundaries, but so is the movement to end it. The resounding call for zero tolerance for FGMC strategically falls in line with the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 on gender equity, where Target 5.3 calls for the elimination of all harmful practices, including FGMC by the year 2030. And so zero tolerance is indeed appropriate. Zero tolerance for FGMC also comes almost exactly a month after the instatement of the US Stop FGMC Act, which amends the US federal law against FGMC, which has actually been in place in the US since 1996. These amendments render our federal law as a powerful tool for prevention and an accelerator for social change, primarily when used to raise awareness and educate. With so much momentum towards positive change, the question now is, how do we collectively move forward and do this right to protect girls? Today, we'll be hearing from monumental voices who've actually worked on these laws both in the US and abroad, and continue to work tirelessly to make sure these laws are disseminated and that the provisions within are properly implemented and communicated effectively to communities, so that they may be truly used as a tool to protect girls, to support survivors, and to educate and raise awareness in the US. Our panelists include Mariam Saifi, Dr. Karen McDonald, and Mrs. Angela Peabody. And we're also pleased to have Imam Muhammad Majid. It's important to note here, however, that the role of faith leaders in this forward movement cannot be understated, as faith leaders are pivotal to disseminating misperceptions about the practice and leading our communities beyond this harmful tradition. They also serve as strong allies for protecting both girls at risk and supporting survivors who speak up against this practice. Appropriately, this year's theme for Zero Tolerance Day is No Time for Global Inaction. Unite, fund, and act to end female genital mutilation. So welcome again as we engage in this important conversation that has been organized by Rahma, which has been active in this space since 2016, and I will give the floor to Rahma's founder, Ms. Khadijah Abdullah, to take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Khan, and welcome everybody to this very, very important event. Dr. Khan's also part of Rahma. She's one of our board members, and we're so happy to have her on board with her expertise and her passion for this very topic. Rahma has partnered with GW, Milken School of Public Health out here in DC, and we created a toolkit that kind of focuses on survivors and providers that provide health to these survivors on FGM/C. And the goal is we're trying to find ways to provide culturally competent care so that people can go and see providers and feel safe and feel welcome. And we finished this toolkit in 2019, but we learned that the voices of men were missing. So now we are interviewing men and getting their feedback and their thoughts and perspectives, and also faith leaders that are men, to add their voices to this toolkit to hopefully continue the educational efforts and raise awareness. And we're really happy to have this discussion today, because as Dr. Gada said, we've had the Stop FGM Act that came across last month, and then also we're working, today's Awareness Day. So we're happy to have Miriam Saifi, which I'll bring onto the screen now, and Angela Peabody as well. Welcome, welcome. And Dr. McDonald. And we'll begin our discussion now. So thank you all for joining. And please, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the chat. And we'll definitely try our best to make sure that we bring it up and have a community discussion around this topic. So thank you again. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
If you'll take a moment to introduce yourselves and your organizations, please feel free to do so at this time.
So I'm Miriam Saifi. I'm speaking here in my personal capacity. I'm a survivor of FGM myself and have been active in the space for the last maybe 5 years or so. So happy to be here. Thanks.
And I'm Kara McDonald, and I'm an associate professor at the George Washington University School of Public Health. And I have been working with RACMA and with the Global Women Peace Foundation for about 5 years now. And you will not meet a more dedicated group of women who really want to make sure that we can achieve the sustainable SDG goal of 5 for zero prevalence of FGM worldwide. So thank you all for coming here today.
Hello, I'm Angela Peabody, and I'm the Executive Director at Global Women Peace Foundation. I've worked with everybody on this panel, including the 2 moderators, and it's a pleasure and honor to be here.
It's an honor to have this discussion with you, as always. So we wanted to jump right in and wanted to ask the first question that we've received from in advance. And of course, if you have questions you want to ask, again, leave them in the chat and we'll try our best to answer those as well. But our first question is to Dr. McDonald. Are there any federal laws around FGM/C? And if so, what are they?
That is a fantastic question. And I'm so happy to say that the answer is yes. We are incredibly fortunate that January 5th, right before another day that occurred in our nation's history, we were fortunate to have the Stop FGM Act signed into law. The act is actually cited as the Strengthening the Opposition to Female Genital Mutilation Act of 2020, or the Stop FGM Act of 2020. And as Dr. Khan had remarked in her opening remarks, this act was necessary because we did have a federal legislation in place from 1996, which was a federal Female Genital Mutilation Act, which had been introduced by former Congresswoman Pat Schroeder. However, that act had not been challenged in courts until 2018. And in 2018, the act was actually struck down as unconstitutional in the Sixth Circuit Court by U.S. Federal Judge Bernard Friedman in Michigan, who argued successfully that the federal government did not have the authority to enact legislation outside of interstate commerce. And as part of that ruling, the charges that were brought against 8 people who had engaged in FGMC against at least 9 girls was dropped. And we found that the Department of Justice did not appeal the ruling, but the House of Representatives did appeal it, and it was ultimately shut down. But I will say that myself and others that are on this call today, I want to pay tribute to Dr. Khan and to Angela Peabody, who worked tirelessly in the interim, knowing that this could be a possibility. So we had been working with the House of Representatives, the Judiciary Committee, and started to draft the new federal legislation. And that was introduced to the floor on March 5th of 2020 by Sheila Jackson Lee, who is also part of the first federal laws that came out, and also part of the vacation cutting law that came out in 2013, which made transport of girls prohibited. for vacation cutting, for transporting of girls outside of the U.S. So then in something, we thought March 5th, 2020, it was unanimously, we thought was going to get through the Judiciary Committee into the House. But as we know, we had a certain pandemic happen. We also had some impeachment hearings that happened. So FGM, we sort of lost a little bit of momentum only at the House of Representatives. But I can tell you all of the women that are on this call right now did not lose momentum. And we kept that fire going, such that in September, it was then unanimously passed in the House of Representatives. This did not happen, folks, but that's how much that people believe in stopping FGM in the US. Unanimously passed in the House. It was then introduced into the Senate in December, unanimously passed. It was bipartisan, it was bicameral. So such that when it came to the president's desk on January 5th, it was signed into law. And the interesting thing about the new Stop FGM Act of 2020, which improved from the original in 1996, is that there is actually a clause, section 4 of the report, which is entitled Report. So what Dr. Khan said, that the law is just a start. It is now up to all of us to ensure that it is enacted and it is followed. And part of what we did when we drafted this new legislation is that we ensured that there was a reporting mechanism put in place, that there is a responsibility to the people of the US, that we engage in looking at what we call the epidemiology. We want to know what is the prevalence, so how many girls and women have been cut, because we don't know that. We don't ask that question. So that is actually now part of the law. And it is now, it is a responsibility of the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Secretary of Education, that they have to submit to Congress a report on an annual basis. That is a huge improvement as to what we had in 1996, such that now action has to be taken so that FGM does not fall into the background, but stays at the forefront. I should also say we worked with the Violence Against Women Act also to ensure that FGM was not placed under other cultural forms of violence, but rather was going to be appropriated funds in and of itself as a form of gender-based violence. Unfortunately, though, as we know, VAWA is stuck in the Senate right now. But we are moving on multiple fronts on state and federal laws to ensure that FGM stays on top of people's radars, and that it is found to be a form of human rights abuse and a form of gender-based violence.
Wow. Thank you for that very detailed description and feedback. I think it's very important people understand all the different layers that go into this. And people are already asking questions in the comments, as we can see. I know one question just came already about in the District of Columbia, there's like 11 states, including DC, that do not have legislation in effect. So what does that matter? So do you want to address that question, or anyone else in the panel want to kind of give feedback on that?
I can give a quick feedback, and I know Angela has been working on state laws. It is important that every state also have a law, as we just saw with Michigan. So one of the reasons why the Michigan case was dropped was Michigan did not have its own state law at the time. So now it is imperative that all states have their own state law, because the federal law really does concentrate on interstate commerce. And so we need to have those state laws. We are actually also working with the District of Columbia. They had introduced a similar provision in their laws. Again, COVID, so actually did not get formally introduced. We're hoping to change that. As well as, that's why it is so important that we have not only the federal law, but the state laws as well. It's kind of like, your belts and your suspenders. You want to make sure you have both. So we have safety nets just in case. But I want to also turn it over to Angela Peabody, because she has actually been quite instrumental in working with states in helping to design laws.
Well, thanks, Karen. I worked in Virginia, where I am, and we helped to pass the state law in Virginia. And in fact, Michigan, we got our state law passed in Virginia the same year that the arrest happened in Michigan, and Michigan hurriedly passed their state law after that event, after the arrest in Michigan. But somebody asked, I think, if I saw in the chat box, somebody asked if a state doesn't have a state law, would the federal law cover any crimes that are committed in that state? And I believe the answer is yes. The federal law should cover, even though, like Karen said, it's very important for all states to have, all 50 states to have laws. But in the meantime, if a state does not have state laws and that crime is committed in that particular state, I believe that the federal law will cover it.
And I think also the federal law, if it's committed across state lines, it would cover. So in the case of the Michigan case, girls were transported from Minnesota and Illinois to Michigan, which made it a federal crime.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't preclude also having FGM prosecuted as well as it should be as a form of child abuse under capital law. So that doesn't preclude that from happening. But prosecutors have not utilize that as an avenue for prosecution, and I know it's going to be part of the discussion today, but have hidden behind this being a quote unquote cultural practice. And we have to make sure, and when we communicate about FGM, that we don't hide behind that this is a form of human rights abuse, form of child abuse, and gender-based violence.
Wow. I think this is a really good kickoff to our discussion, talking about the law to understand how the U.S. views FGM/C and what kind of things are in place to kind of take action if it does happen. I know we have other questions here.
Khadijah, I can actually just jump in, and we'll get to the questions as well, but just to kind of rewind a little bit as to why it even matters. Why do we need laws? There's a discussion of, legislation that won't necessarily, end FGM, and I agree with that, in the sense that we have laws against rape, we have laws against incest and murder and all of these things, and so the laws I think are important also to create a normative framework that this is wrong. There's a lot of adjudication within our communities. Within, for example, as Khadijah mentioned, this is happening across different faith traditions. Muslims, Christians, across race, et cetera. It's here in the U.S. We have a history of it here in the U.S. Up until the 19th century, it was considered a cure for hysteria. So it was indigenous to the U.S. It's not associated as a black and brown issue, exotic cultural practice in faraway places, but we know it's happening here to white Christian communities as well that are often left out of the conversation. So the reason the law is so important is that it creates sort of a, just a baseline, just like we have the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. There's no way we can actually implement that. The UN doesn't even have the ability to enforce it. But again, it creates this normative baseline for all countries that have sort of collectively agreed that this is not, human rights is a good thing. We want to preserve and safeguard it. And I think the law, both at the federal level, the restoration of the federal ban earlier this year in January, and all of these state laws also create and catalyze conversations. I've been working in a state I used to live in Washington State, that doesn't have a federal ban, a state level ban. And it was really in response to not having a federal law, to be able to, engage with local legislators who don't really know very much about the issue itself. They assume, it's happening somewhere in Africa, I thought, and then they're sort of surprised that, oh, wow, there's, survivors here. There's upwards of 500,000. according to estimates of the CDC. Again, we don't have full data collection, but we know that there's prevalence across the US. And so the laws are important. They're the first step in a much broader conversation, but it's important to sort of have those on the books. But it's also very difficult to enforce. I mean, this is an act of, intergenerational structural violence. This typically happens, to young girls, and in communities where, their parents might be bringing them, to be cut. In my case, my parents didn't know. I was in India, and my aunt cut me without their consent. So it creates a lot of trauma within the family, similar to acts of child abuse, for example, or incest. It's a really difficult thing to even talk about. So survivors come forward and share their stories. There aren't a huge number, largely because there's a ton of backlash. Like you end up, it's awkward at Thanksgiving. It's not fun, for us. But we do it, and I've kind of judiciously, I don't say yes to all speaking engagements because it takes a lot, honestly, out of me to hear about this. It's triggering, it's traumatizing. We're in a moment of collective trauma, during a global pandemic, a national reckoning on race, and this sort of on top of it. And we know that through COVID as well, with the lockdown, there's incidents that are increasing globally as well when it comes to both FGM, child marriage, and other forms of violence. So for me, it's important, when the Detroit case, which was in 2018, so Karen mentioned there was a case in Detroit where the federal law for the first time was tested. And the fact that it was overturned, largely in a technicality, the judge ruled that FGM is wrong, it's abhorrent, it's a it's a human rights abuse and a form of child abuse. But he said, hey, there's, we have this law, the Commerce Clause, and this just doesn't pass the test, right, of interstate commerce. So it's very technical. But the message it sent to the communities that practice, including my own, is that, we have a constitutional green light. We're good to go. So not having the federal law sends this message to communities that it's okay, that they're going to, it's hard enough to prosecute anyway, even when you have the laws. You can have the best laws on the books, but it's not easy. And the second point I wanted to make is, Rahma is based in the DC, Virginia area. And one issue too is you can have all the most beautiful laws on the books, but if you have community leaders and religious leaders that are proselytizing and promoting FGM, it's going to keep happening. It'll happen underground. It'll happen, there's vacation cutting. People, it's something that can be done outside of plain sight, and it's usually done by a family member or a trusted relative. So, this case, that we were, Khadijah, Ghada, and I, and others on this panel were advocating and raising our voices back in 2017 of an imam in Virginia, in Dar al-Hijra, a mosque that's quite large. It has a huge, population. This imam was, saying that, that FGM, what he called female circumcision, again, the semantics matter, any form of cutting, according to the World Health Organization, is a form of FGM. Any form, even touching, is a form of FGM. There's the ideas of types 1 through 4, all forms of excision, just like all forms of rape are rape, all forms of excision are an act of violence. And he was advocating for a form of FGM. And, there was an outcry against it, him saying this, he temporarily, stepped down. And then when the press went away, he was reinstated. So he's back, right? And he's continuing to promote this ideology that which is absolutely false, that FGM is somehow part of prophetic tradition, right? The Hadith, and that's not true. It is not in the Quran. And Imam Majid, I think, who might be joining us later, has spoken eloquently. A lot of imams have talked about how this is not part of the religion. So the laws are important, but the community-based activism, the work that Rahma is doing and all the others on the panel are doing to engage communities is equally, if not more important. So it's all part of an ecosystem.
Well, thank you for sharing this, Miriam, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your personal story. And you mentioned Imam Majid as well. Actually, he is here, so I'm gonna bring him onto the panel.
Perfect. Wonderful.
So Imam Majid, welcome to the panel. Thank you for joining us this evening, or afternoon, actually. Really happy to have you and join the discussion. And if you have a moment to introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are, we appreciate that, inshallah.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for inviting me, and appreciate the great work you're doing in this area on behalf of many women around the world, especially in the Muslim community. And I'm the Imam of Adam Center, All Dallas Area Muslim Society, originally from Sudan. And I'm very happy to be with you today in this discussions.
Thank you for joining us. And Miriam, you mentioned that FGM/C, is an act of child abuse, is an act of violence. And we know that it happens in a lot of different cultures and communities. And if we're trying to do educational efforts or, talk to different communities, how can we do it in a way that is culturally sensitive? We can talk to these communities about this topic without maybe not wanting to talk about it with us or asking us to leave, for example. How can we do this?
I think building trust is the first step. And I think, leaders like everyone on this panel, including yourself, Khadijah, Imam Majid, are sort of at the forefront. You're already trusted advocates within communities. So I think having sort of building off of these existing bonds of trust is so important. So I think it has to be at the grassroots level, and it has to be localized. In every community, it's different. When I was doing work, when I was at the State Department covering this issue on the global scale, you would see that the dynamics and the drivers in, let's say, in the Gambia versus in Sierra Leone, radically different. In Gambia, it might be, misinterpretations of faith tradition, also tribal potentially as well in terms of delineation. And then Sierra Leone, it was secret rituals, these bondo rituals that were coming of age ceremonies that had nothing to do with religion. So I think you also have to look at the local context, and those are neighboring countries. Like when I went there, I thought, oh, well, we should engage imams here. And then they're like, no, that actually totally irrelevant in this context. It's an urban-rural issue versus, in Egypt, if you go, it's pretty evenly divided between Coptic Christian and Muslim communities across the board. Again, it's more of a rural to urban, but with the data that we do have. So I think the dynamics are sort of different community to community. And so I think the approaches that you're mentioning about how do you engage, your toolkit that you've created is an amazing starting point, because you started with sort of survivors and people most connected to the issue, healthcare providers, human rights activists, but expanding to men, religious leaders in communities, religious leaders like Imam Majid, bringing them into the conversation can create this holistic 360 approach to be able to then bring the whole community along with engaging on this, because it's not a survivor issue or a woman's issue. It affects the whole family unit. This is something that really can tear apart the fabric of families. We had last year, I was speaking at the UN at a panel, and a girl from Egypt, where I used to live when I was posted there back almost 10 years ago during the revolution, she bled to death. A doctor, it was medicalized in Egypt, and her name was So she was based in Upper Egypt, and that, I think, created more awareness, which is great to see now in Egypt. They're trying to strengthen their laws and actually look at some of the medicalization. But again, I think you have to look at each community. But I would love, actually, Imam Majid, if you could talk about because this has been so many, I think maybe 5 years or 4 years since you and I first connected when I was working at the State Department. But you so eloquently, I think back in 2017, really broke down how FGM has nothing to do with Islam, and even some of the hadith that are cited by people who are saying, oh, there is a tradition, sort of, even that's weak. And so it'd be great for you to break that down, not to put you on the spot, but I thought it was so beautiful what you did a few years ago and so powerful. Oh, you're muted, Imam Majid.
I'm in the habit to mute myself every time. So that I don't say anything when someone is speaking. It was called self-discipline. Yeah, discipline itself, not to talk over somebody. In the name of God, the source of mercy and the giver of mercy. This issue is very very important. This is a human rights issue. It's not only women issue; it's human rights issue. And people might say, why are you saying that? Because I think that if we always look to women issue as human rights issue, we change the situation, because it is not about women only, but human rights issues. And all of us as community has to be mobilized to address the issue that cause women to lose their life. And I'm so glad my own home country, Sudan, have made it illegal, recently, finally, that to outlaws the FGM. And I would like to have this to be followed by awareness and education, because it's one thing to have the law and the other things to change people's mindset, because sometimes they can go underground and it could be more dangerous actually in many ways. Therefore, you have to follow the law with awareness. From the Islamic perspective, as Imam Nam Ibn al-Hajj in Al-Madkhal, he said that there's a disputed among the scholars about this issue in Fath al-Bari, and therefore it could not be a must. It cannot be a sunnah if people dispute an issue like that. But Imam Shawkani said this hadith is not correct, it's not authentic, and cannot be used as evidence to justify the saying of the Prophet. Imam Shams al-Haq al-Abadi, the reason I'm counting the scholars, because people want them to know where I'm coming from, in a book called Awn al-Ma'bud, he said that this hadith of women's circumcisions, all of the chain of it is not correct, not authentic. And no one should use it as evidence. No one should use it as evidence. Al-Allama Ibn al-Mundhir, scholar named Ibn al-Mundhir, says there is no evidence at all in cutting of women in the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the consensus, the circumcision were for men, no women cutting for females. I'm saying this because somebody might say, okay, can you show me evidence from the Islam that this is not permissible? First of all, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam been proven that he have not done to his children and has females. If the Prophet have not done for his own daughters, who am I or anyone else to say do it to your children? You cannot be more religious than the Prophet himself. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No evidence. No evidence that the companions have done it for their children. The companions that we know. Well, whether in the Sunni tradition or Shia tradition, that the tradition being mentioned, I'm going to say that some people refer it to from the Shia and Sunni community, is not authentic. Not authentic. I pressed the scholars who tried to make this argument with me. They said, in our books, there's something sitting in our book. I said, listen, the Prophet himself is the example. Did he do it? None. That's it. The end of discussions. Don't tell me somebody else have done it. Don't tell me that the assumption that somebody have done it. Show me the evidence that the Prophet have done for his children. I just want to talk about something very important to me. We have seen women lost their life giving birth. We heard of those women, whether in Sudan, whether in Egypt, whether in Ethiopia, whether women have lost their life because of this process. The second thing is that this is about men controlling women. This issue of control. The assumption that, unfortunately, something make me very upset and sad when a person says this meant to reduce women's desire of having a relationship, or accusing women of, if they don't have this being practiced on them, they will not be women of integrity or dignity. This is really an old aspect of it, degrading of women, meant to oppress women, meant to control women, and is unacceptable. Unfortunately, there's some people make business out of this. We went to part of, in the west of Sudan and other places in the part of the world, midwives are doing this as to earn money. Therefore, you have to look to the segment of people who made it out of business, made it like business, to tell them that, first of all, in some countries like Sudan now is illegal. They can be punished by the law. but also we have to find them other alternative to do the right thing rather than hurting people. And I would like just to say to everybody, if this was your own daughter and your mother who suffered to death because this happened to her, you should have think about not to speak about it in a very light manner and not to give anyone indication that this could be possibly permissible. And this, by the way, the argument that many people use, this is the secular people want to impose things on Muslims, feminists right, you know, sorry, far leftist feminist group. I'm just gonna put it all out there. If something is about human rights, it's something about safety of human being. My brothers and sisters who listen to me, don't care about what come from left or right, up or down. You have to accept it. This is about accepting the fact that we protect human life. In Islam, preserving human life is one of the most important aspects of Islamic law. Actually, the center of it. Not preserving only, dignified life. You cannot just live, but dignified life. Live with dignity. And if you don't allow people to live with dignity, you have violated the principles of Islamic law. And a woman that been practiced on her, she is not going to be living with dignity. We're not going to be living a fulfillment life like anyone else. That is why I'm very passionate about this issue. And I think that our community living in America should be aware of the consequences of harming somebody in the name of religion. These double problems. Number one, hurting any human being is considered a sin, not a reward, a sin in the eyes of God. Number two, you're gonna make people question religion. People are gonna question, create a spiritual crisis because you're justifying harm by using religion. And therefore people said the religion that caused me to be in that harm, and still there's an imam and a sheikh and a scholar justifying it, I have nothing to do with it. Now have a person lost all their faith because you're insisting on something that's doubtful. Even it is, even the scholars who try to debate these issues, they said it is not authentic, it is not so clear. You putting them in something doubtful to have them leave their whole religion as a whole. I'm gonna say in a very strong word and terms, if you do that to your children, you're committing a sin. You're not getting a reward. You're hurting a person. And harm in Islam is not permissible. We have all of us, we have to work to prevent harm. And that was one of the golden rules in Islamic laws: do no harm. Do no harm. And I think it's also in Christianity and Judaism as well. Do no harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Imam Majid. And everyone in the comments are saying thank you so much. It's really refreshing to see a imam talk about this, because so often we go to our spaces and we don't see faith leaders kind of talking about FGM or FGM/C, and it's happening right in our communities, and people are looking for support and understanding coming from our faith leaders to kind of like advocate against it and raise awareness on it. So thank you so much for talking about this and bringing this to light. We do have some other questions, but I want to also first want to give the panel time to respond and either add to this as well. So please.
I love listening to you, Imam Majid, every single time I have the opportunity. I think that your voice is so incredibly powerful because you're dispelling the myths that people say are supported. And you're saying, no, they're not. And it's not just me saying it. It is our teachings. It is who we are as people. And I think that is such an important message for all of us. You're right. We have to be, Mariam, you said this, we have to be talking about it, because if we don't talk about it and keep it secret, we're complicit. We think that people agree. So we need Majid, we need Mariam, Angela, Gada, Khadijah, all of us to be dispelling those myths. Otherwise, people will perpetuate them, and we will not make any progress. So I thank you so much.
And I just wanted to echo Karen and Imam Majid. It was great to be reconnected with all of you guys virtually now with the pandemic. But it really, I mean, it matters so much because I was, before you joined, we were talking about, survivors and stories. And there's this whole kind of, we need to break the culture of silence. And so it takes courageous survivors and others that have gone through this to tell their stories to break the silence. But it can be really, it's a lot. Like, it's not fun. It's not easy. I've been doing, Imam Majid, I think I hadn't even shared my own story as an FGM survivor. I think before I met you, and then afterwards, I kind of became more public as an advocate. But it really, I drew a lot of strength from you, honestly, like in the early days. And it was your inspiration and example. But faith leaders like you make, like as Karen said and others, a tremendous, it's such a source of comfort and support. And also there's a lot of gaslighting that happens within the community where you're told, well, there's type 1 versus type 4. Well, you went through type 1, so that's not so bad. What's the big, like, it's not like more invasive forms, right, where people die. And I think your point about dignity, I think, was so powerful because it's not about just living, right? It's like, sure, I survived, so I'm still alive. So why should I complain, right? People have had it worse. Girls, last year, a girl from Asyut, from close to Sudan, Upper Egypt, died on the, literally bled to death, right? So I guess I'm lucky, but at the same time, we should all be, like, all girls should be living lives of dignity, like you said, and that's so grounded in Islam and a religion so rooted in social justice. So you've kind of brought that back again. That is the core and the foundation of the faith, both Islam, and Christianity, and across all these traditions. So I think that was so powerful, and just very grateful for your, because ultimately we want girls to be safe, to be whole, and that's no form of cutting, and also to just have childhoods that are free. And I think your point about it being grounded in control, that's the root of all of it. All forms of gender violence, whether it's FGM, whether it's child marriage, or anything that we see, it's about controlling women and girls and their sexuality, and that's not part of the faith. And I think you saying that over and over with such power and such poignant kind of resonance is so incredibly important. So I'm so grateful to Khadijah with Rahma and engaging faith leaders and creating this toolkit, because I think I would love to see the template of Peaceful Families Project and the work that you've done on raising awareness on domestic violence to integrate FGM into that conversation, into that space, because it's so, once you start to create these spaces and break the culture of silence, but also create these spaces within that are sustained within mosques, within community centers and elsewhere, that's where you'll start to see the generational change. And the law is the foundation, but it's very much, as you said, the beginning of the conversation, and what we're doing here is kind of the continuation. So thank you.
And I wanted to mention, you mentioned the Rahma and the toolkit, and we interviewed a lot of different men, and a lot of them were not even aware of how the long-term effects of FGM/C. They were not aware, and many of them were horrified. And now many of them want to continue the work and actually host workshops themselves and talk to their community about it. We actually had some men who thought of just like, oh, it's circumcision, like it's nothing too much about it. And we had to explain to them different types, and they're like, whoa, this is mutilation. We did not understand the depth of this, and it's happening to our women and our girls. And they felt more empowered to kind of continue this conversation. I know that Imam Majid had mentioned as well that the laws have passed, but we have to do more. So I kind of want to have this discussion now as well. The law is passed, okay, but what do we do now? How can we empower women and girls? How can we continue the work? And I know Angela Peabody is doing work with children in schools. So I want to hear about that. So if you want to share that information, I would love to hear more from you on that topic.
Sorry, I was muted. to empower women. How can we empower women and girls? Empowering women and girls can be accomplished through education. That is what I've always preached, education and more education. It is why our mission statement says empowering women and girls through education to help end gender-based violence, especially FGMC. I've always stressed that the surest way to ending the practice of FGM is through education. Even though it might be the slowest way, education is the slowest way, because I think if we take it generation by generation, it is the best way, it is the surest way to ending it. It might be the slowest way because we're looking at generational difference. An educated girl, I always say, is less likely to have her own daughter excised when she becomes a mother. And an educated girl is less likely to succumb to the deceptive urges of the excisers. So education is the key element to ending FGMC. But what we've been doing to the efforts that we've been making to educate school age children on FGMC is we worked hard in Virginia to get a bill passed last year. Well, not last year, in 2019. We worked hard with a state senator in Virginia to pass an education bill that mandates all public schools in the Commonwealth of Virginia to teach FGMC in middle and high schools to middle and high school students. We are currently working with a couple of the counties in Virginia to get proper lesson plan and teachers training in place. Hopefully by the fall of this year, we will have that completed. And we have also presented our plan to school administrators in Virginia and the Education Committee. In addition, we continue to get invited to lecture high school students in Virginia on FGM. What has also been encouraging is that high school students lately in Virginia have been approaching us to intern with us so that they will have an opportunity to learn more about FGMC. And I think engaging, so far we've always had interns from the university level and graduate school level, but I think engaging the high school students and middle school students will encourage them to spread the word. Imam Majid mentioned earlier that in addition to the laws being passed, we also need to advocate and spread information to people. And I think if we look at the lower level of the children in education, I think it will be a great way to get the message out and to educate the public. And even though it's a slower way, like I said, but it's the surest way through education.
Thank you, Angela. And for those who are interested in following Angela's work, she's the founder of Global Women Peace Foundation, and going across the bottom of the screen is her website and URL. So please go support and learn more about her work. It's very, very important work. So definitely, she also does a walk every year. Angela, tell about your walk. That's very important. Share that information, please.
I'm too quick to mute myself, sorry. Every year since 2014, we have been putting on the walk to end FGM in Washington, on the Mall in Washington, D.C. And the first year we started, we said, if we just
I think we lost Angela for a minute. So Angela, just in case you can hear us. All right, Angela, I think we lost you. So we're going to try to hopefully get you back in a minute, but we'll continue the conversation for now. And I wanted to ask others that are part of this discussion, what else are you doing in the community, or we're doing in the community to help empower women and girls around FGC/prevention, or awareness or education?
I think one of the most important aspects of this is to have religious leaders agree on the danger of this issue, because unfortunately, FGM being practiced because of religious justification, and some places cultural justification, and therefore we have to be able to address the issue of the cultural and religious components of it. And here to deconstruct the argument people made to justify FGM. And that's why in my training, I speak to religious leaders about it. And we address the Islamic perspective from understanding of something called the objective of Islamic law, maqasid al-sharia. And also that to address the issue from the woman perspective. It's because most of the religious leaders in the Muslim communities are men. And one of the things I'm advocating for women's scholarship, that we need to have more voice of women interpreting Islam and teaching Islam and promoting scholarship of women in our community. Thank God, in our own community here at Adams Center, we have Dr. Zainab Al-Alwani, very well-known scholar, and there's some other scholars. And now in America, Sheikh Dr. Tamara Gray and other scholars, Dr. Madsen, and Dr. Ingrid Madsen. We have well-known female scholars. And therefore, it cannot be only the voice of male scholars, but or female scholars. The other things that what I find it to be powerful is to people to listen to survivors. Listen to survivors really put the face into the issue. Because whether that's an issue of domestic violence, violence against women in general, the religious leader, they need to hear someone who spoke about the psychological, emotional, physical impact on them. Because now no longer you're talking about an abstract. You're talking about real person standing before you or talking before you. Well, that's one of the things that I think is important, telling the story. I just saw in reaction in the chat that people talk about two women in chat, lost their life. I just saw that in some countries that if a woman died, a girl died in that process. Two girls died in the process in Chad, and another country that they said if the girl died during the process, that now instead of feeling sorry that they say that she was not a good girl, that means she have done something wrong. Come on. We cannot associate this with Islam. We cannot. It'd be a crime to associate this with Islam. Absolutely. Therefore, it's very important for all of us. I think that, as we do put literature in bathrooms for the domestic violence, we have to find a way to create awareness in this issue in every mosque. And people have to know where to go to seek help. And one more thing that we need to make sure that we tell the community, not because it's illegal in the United States, you take your children to back home. I don't know if you have addressed that issue already, and have the procedure be, the crime being committed against the children overseas. Is a crime here, a crime there, in Islamic perspective. Therefore, some people do take their children and violate them. I call it violation because I do believe that, and take them overseas and do this to them and then bring them back here. Please, if you see somebody want to do this, a relative of yours, a members of a community, please share with them what I just said, that you cannot be a participant in violating somebody's life and wronging somebody, because you'll be asked about in the day of judgment. You cannot do that to people. Please be sure that this is not something acceptable, no matter how much pressure people put on you. They said this has been a tradition in our group, or in our religion, or our country. Tradition had to be challenged. The Prophet ﷺ challenged every tradition of Makkah almost. He didn't go with the norms. And they said, their argument was, this is what our forefather used to do. Then the answer was, what if you and your forefathers were wrong? We need just to follow it? That's the Quranic perspective. That's what we need to do, in addressing this issue.
I think we're all just digesting everything you just said and kind of taking a moment to just take it all in. Does anyone else want to leave any comments before we move on to the next topic of discussion? Any feedback?
It's just it's powerful. I mean, I think in the chat box I was reading, people were echoing what you were saying, Imam Majid. There's the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, the Coptic bishops. I mean, so many people for years have been speaking out against the false link between FGM and religious doctrine. I think one of the challenges, and you brought this up, is it needs to be in every mosque, right? You need to have the pamphlets that you have on domestic violence. There needs to be sort of this decentralized approach, because I think that's been the challenge, is that there are pockets of people and religious authorities that have been saying this and echoing this for decades. This isn't we've been discussing the issue of FGM for decades. And Sudan, I think, was one of the first countries to organize around FGM back in, I think, 30 plus years ago. So this isn't a new conversation. I mean, some of us are newer to the issue, but it's something that's been happening for a long time. And I think you're in this moment as well, with the pandemic and social media and people virtually being able to convene like this, I think there are opportunities for us to engage in the education that Angela mentioned. The education, it's the long haul, but it's probably the most sustainable way to really end it, right? End FGM in a generation, is if it's a hearts and minds thing as much as it is. People will find loopholes for, with vacation cutting and other, which again is illegal in the US, but hard to catch, right? Like if you transport somebody to another country and they come back and this is a child, it's not easy for them to report this. So we can have all the laws on the books, but again, it's what you're saying was so inspirational, because it's getting to the heart of people, right? And just explaining, no matter what society says or peer pressure there is, know what's in your heart, that this is something that's just wrong. And I mean, having gone through it, I think about that a lot, like the me before I was cut versus the me after. I have a niece that's a little bit older than I was when I was cut. Now she's 11, but I started my advocacy work when she was 7, actually, when the same age I was cut, because I just saw her and I thought, my God, I can't imagine, if anything like this were to have happened to her, or any girl, right? And so I think that for me was that moment of, I have to be, part of a more public conversation. And actually the reason too is because a lot of survivors, I mean, people even in my own family and others, they're below the radar. They're never going to publicly be on a panel or speak out, because it is just so hard. So I think that there's more of a need for the broader community, so that the burden isn't only on survivors to continue to, they have to, we tell our stories for activation to put a human face to this. But I think Imam Majid and others, and Karen and Angela, Khadijah, Ghada, all of you, carrying this forward and sustaining this, it's so critical. So very grateful. Yeah, thank you.
That was the thing we heard loud and clear in talking with healthcare providers and survivors. The stigma, the fear, the things that you're told as a child. If you tell what happened, something's going to happen to you. Those are real. You're told this by people you trust, and people who you trust have also done this to you. So if we can, I see it in the chat, I totally agree. We need to have everyone talking about this. without repercussion for speaking out. Because if we don't have this consistent message that we are here to support our young girls, our young, infant daughters, and if we don't have that message all around, then we're not going to be creating that awareness, making those social changes, making those norms, dispelling those myths, and they're going to be allowed to perpetuate. So having this sort of forum here where we talk about it and shine a light on it. And I just want to see what people say, because I think this is a great question. What do we do if we know a local imam is advocating FGM? This is a question for all of us. What do you think that should happen?
I think that you should not get any religious leader off the hook by challenging them in wrongdoing. Same thing in domestic violence. You have imam, rabbi, pastors, and so forth will tell a woman, just go back to your husband, become patient. Be patient, stay in a relationship. Those are the religious leader. First of all, I think if the person need to be educated, she had to be educated first. But if you're insisting harming people, should not be in that position. Honestly. End of discussions. Why I'm saying that? The role of religious leaders is to provide a spiritual guidance, not to create a spiritual crisis. I repeat, the role of the religious leaders to create spiritual guidance, not to create a spiritual crisis. If you're going to make people doubting God because of you, doubting that the teaching of Islam, the beautiful teaching of Islam, the compassion, of mercy, and so forth, you shouldn't be there. You shouldn't be there. That is one aspect. The second aspect of it, I think, if somebody give you a wrong advice in religion, you have to check them out. What I mean by that, the reason cult being created is secrecy. There was secret here. Secrecy is why the cult being created. If a person really believe in that, why are they speaking publicly about it? Because he knows that if he speak publicly, people are going to speak against it. Therefore, he want to harm people and give them wrong advice in private and so forth. We cannot do that. Finally, that there's some people, they have what I call them lack of consistency. They have double talk. You have to have one conversation. Either we are with it or against it. One conversation. And one conversation for religious leaders is very important in every aspect, whether in interfaith, whether it's in domestic violence. Or you cannot say one thing in private and one thing is public. You can do that. This is a matter of relationship with God. And relationship with God cannot be manipulating people. And therefore, I think we should call him out. A person should talk to them and say to them, why are you telling people in private this issue? Do you believe he's wrong? If you say he doesn't believe you're wrong, what do you need? You need evidence? We need to bring people to you. Because if we change that person's mind, it'd be great. Because that maybe person become now an ally, speaking against it. But he was insisting, should not be in that position. Because one person is too many. If that person caused to hurt one person, one is too many, especially using religion.
You know what, Imam Majid, you mentioned about faith leaders and you calling them out if they're not talking against, FGC, are they perpetuating it? And one of the things that we're doing at Rahma is trying to provide a resource to faith leaders so that some of them have misconceptions that FGC is okay. And they might use texts or try to validate it through that way. So by doing this research, we talk to the faith leaders, getting their information and showing that there isn't a space for this in Islam. And then another thing that we're doing now, we have faith leaders like yourself speak out about it because they see people like yourself speaking out on it. Maybe they can feel like, okay, now I feel empowered. I can do the same thing. I see this imam talking about it. Okay, I can do it too. Maybe I won't receive the backlash. Sometimes they're afraid of backlash. many times. Even as a faith leader, sometimes many people are afraid of backlash. And then I see in the comments a lot of talk about education. That's very, very important. And again, at Rahma, we're organizing a conference actually in March focused on FGC around populations that are highly affected by it. We're having Sayo, we're having Heart Women and Girls and Rahma and others involved in this. And then also we're having one focus again in April on another population, because I think it's very important to have these conversations, especially with women and girls, to hopefully empower them. I know Mary mentioned before, we're always focusing a lot on the trauma in the horrific act of FGC. And other times focus on empowering women and girls to talk about it and have these discussions. And hopefully then they can continue to break the cycle of happening to their children. So I wanted just to share that. And for those who are interested in learning more about the conference we're trying to do in March, please contact us and get involved. We're having over 25 women, and we're going to have the face perspective. We're going to have information about it. I think it's very, very important to have these conversations. And that's one way, is to have conversations. And if you feel you don't have the tools to have those conversations, contact one of us on this board, on this panel, and ask us. We're here to help. We're here to help lead these conversations and try to find a way to help guide, because we know it can be a very sensitive topic, especially if you come from a community where it's heavily practiced for generations and generations and generations. So I see a lot of comments here as well. So I don't know if we want to get into that or want to have more discussion from the panel, but there's a lot of people saying a lot of great things that need to be amplified. So
I just want to answer the question that's on the screen right now from Jessica. Yes, actually, there's a whole section of the toolkit just for healthcare providers. And we don't mean just clinicians. It is social service providers. It is, like you're saying, in domestic violence. And if you go to the sub-menus, you will see that there are screening, intervention, referral processes focused a lot in the District, Maryland, and Virginia area, but there are national ones as well. So do check out the toolkit, because there's a whole menu just for health and well-being, and just for healthcare providers. There's another section of the toolkit just for women and survivors. And then, as Khadijah has been saying, building out the other sections of the toolkit for men, faith-based leaders, community members. So stay tuned. It is a virtual, online, living toolkit. It is meant to change as we change. So bookmark it and come back to it often.
Yes, definitely. And the part where we're incorporating the voices of men should be available in the next few months. So definitely keep checking out this website and coming back to us. Because it's living, it changes, it doesn't stay the same information. And that's it. We kind of update it as the world updates around us. So it's very important to come back and check it out for updates for sure.
Probably Imam Majid's comment on this video should also be included in the section we're adding on men and religious leaders.
I definitely agree, Dr. Khan. So I guess it's 4:09 now. I have about 20 minutes left of time together. So I wanted to definitely get a chance to go to the comments and answer more questions that are coming in. So if people have comments, they have feedback, or they have questions, please drop them in the comments now, and we'll go ahead and take some time to address that. And while we're waiting for those to come in, do anyone from the panel have any last thoughts or anything they want to add that hasn't been asked that you think is important to amplify at this time?
I wanted to pass the mic to Angela because she was cut off during the Global Women's Walk. So I wanted to make sure you talked about that.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Miriam. I was just talking about our event, Walk to End FGM, that we put on every year, every October in Washington, D.C. And it's become a very popular event, now worldwide known. Last year, we didn't do it in person, but we were able to do it virtually, have a virtual program, and people went out and walked in their communities. And the whole idea is stemmed from education and advocacy, raising awareness. And I was mentioning, I also want to just congratulate Khadijah for inviting the Imam I have never had the pleasure of being on the same roster with him or to even speak with him, and it's just amazing. I'm just eager when I get off here to go and talk to my son about what the Imam had to say, because he and I talk about this all the time, and a lot of things that the Imam said, we discussed that. So from a male perspective. So thank you very much, Imam, for coming on, and all of the things that you had to say. Very important. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Angela. And the honor is on mine. Thank you, Imam, as well. Like, I just asked, and he said, yeah, that's the main thing. Like, he made time on a Saturday to come and speak. So much appreciated. And someone mentioned that to please have like Christian voices. So I did want to say that, again, with Rahma, we actually also talked to Christian faith leaders as well. And they also have some feedback in the toolkit. But I do agree. I think when we have this again, we'll bring in faith leaders from diverse faiths as well, because it doesn't just happen in the Muslim community, it happens in a lot of communities. So it's important to make sure we have that reflection on the panel, that can bring that perspective from the communities that they are part of as well.
And one thing we can share maybe on social media, there's a video, Imam Majid was in it. There was a Coptic bishop from Texas who was in it as well. So we had sort of I produced this maybe like 4 years ago, I think, on engaging religious leaders around FGM. And it was very intentional that we had both Muslim and Christian perspectives, as well as across race and geography. We had white Christian survivors and others. So it wasn't seen as, again, the way it's typically framed. Very much it's a global issue. So it was a great comment that to even build an interfaith movement around this would be just like we have on other issues that affect all faith traditions. I think that's a great idea.
There was a question for Imam Majid also on how to get bigger bodies or organizations like ISNA involved in these types of conversations.
Absolutely, I agree that actually when I was president of ISNA, I spoke many times on this issue. And one talk I gave at the State Department and their website actually. But I think that we should have the Fiqh Council, which is the Council of Jurists in America, to make official statement on this issue. And I'm just going to also to say that we have to have peer-to-peer conversations, meaning that the scholars should talk to other scholars around this issue, not the scholars who don't, or believe in it, or they believe in it, sorry, but the scholars also who do not believe in it, but they are quiet about it. We need to have those people to speak up. Therefore, I think that this will be important for the community here, popular voices, and from this, conversation, I'm calling to scholars, especially have a lot of social media following. I'm going to ask Sheikh Yasser Qadi, Dr. Umar Suleiman, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and Imam Zaid, and all the scholars who I know they have great teaching, and all of us, they agree what I'm just saying to you. They agree on this, but we need to have them people to hear from them as well, inshallah, and you will hear from them, inshallah.
Thank you, Imam Majid. Another question that came along was if FGM, to the words of, if FGM is something that is performed under the table or in secret, how are we supposed to detect and protect girls if it is not easily detectable? So I'm putting that question forward to the panelists.
You're talking about how can we prevent it from being secretive?
Yes, how can we, there's two parts. How can we prevent it from being secretive? But if it was already performed and it was done in secret, how can it be detected or the numbers be counted, etc. If it was, if the detection process is very difficult to ascertain.
I would recommend that my experience in the issue of domestic violence and mental health, for example. If you speak about the issue a lot in the community, then people come forward. And people will say that I've been abused mentally and verbally. I didn't realize that. Or a person come to say, I didn't know that I was suffering all of this, in abusive relationship. And the more you create awareness about it, people come forward. I think that every mosque should have a workshop in this issue, especially the mosque where the community, then maybe that they have members of communities come from areas or culture they practice FGM. Therefore, the more you speak about it in a Friday sermon, is you make a workshop, and it's very important to bring experts with the imam, because we need to close this gap between imam and activist. Because you need the partnership, collaboration in every mosque. Bring your activists, advocates, people in your community, and have them to stand next to the imam and speak together. For next time they hear from them, they know the imam is approving of this. They get the support of the imam. This is a very important aspect of this, so that people can come forward to talk about how we need to help people too. It's not about just a person said this done to me. How about the psychological aspect, the counseling, the support system, and so forth? It's not about just for us to, it is not about condemnation, to condemn it only, but also to help the survivor. That's what we need to do in our community, helping the survivors.
Yeah, I think that's so critical, because I think when we talk about FGM, we fixate on the health part, right? It's what type, how invasive was it? Is there a maternal, health impact in terms of pregnancy or complications? And it's so intellectualized. And so one of the things I worked on with a friend of mine through her organization called the Oslo Women's Rights Initiative, so in partnership with the Nobel Peace Center, was to just flip the whole script on how we talk about FGM. I had a reporter from The Economist ask me, "Oh, what type are you?" Like, as though it was just like this casual, "What type of FGM are you?" And I said, you would never ask, if I was a white person and I was a rape survivor, you never would ask me, "How were you raped? Can you describe it for me? I'd like to hear this." Like, it was so dehumanizing. So the language we use to talk about FGM is incredibly dehumanizing. And as someone who, in my professional life, I feel like very accomplished on this issue, it makes me feel small. It makes me feel kind of like the kid, right, that was sitting in the corner after this happened, just bewildered, right? It was a really tough thing. So I think the language that we're talking, the spaces when we talk about types 1 through 4, a lot of imams, a lot of other leaders will say, well, we're against FGM. That's wrong. What's done and they've racialized it. What's done in Africa, that's wrong. That's FGM. That's mutilation. But cutting, or circumcision, that's different. That's my community, the Bora community, will say, no, what we do, it's very civilized. It's like a good FGM versus bad FGM, this false dichotomy. And that's really problematic, the racializing, adding this layer of what's barbaric versus what's not. And so I think the more we can, in unison, through a chorus of all of us, say that all forms of excision are wrong. The World Health Organization in 2017, it was their second most tweeted tweet at that moment, I guess, was, there's no medical purpose for FGM. It only causes harm, both physical and psychological. They haven't made the same guidance on male circumcision, which is a different issue. Male circumcision, the equivalent of male circumcision or the equivalent of FGM to male circumcision is castration, right? FGM is essentially the organ, right? Is being castrated. There's no purpose for that, except as others have mentioned. Imam Majid pointedly said it's about control. It's about sort of subduing the girl at a time in her life that's very critical. Usually it's around age 7-ish, 7 to 9 or 10, just before they've hit puberty, and just when they're kind of becoming, figuring out the world. Like, it's a complicated place, and this is a way to really And for me, it was done in a way that I remembered it, right? It wasn't done, for me in my case, it wasn't done when I was a baby. It was done just to mark me, to be like, and this is a form to crush your childhood, basically. That was kind of the moment, if I want to go back to it. So I think the emotional and psychological piece is so critical. The mental health, we as a country don't really prioritize mental health. Even in this pandemic, we should be all thinking about it. We're all grieving in very unorthodox ways. I just lost a family member recently, and you have to do it. I had to tell my dad, you can't go visit. Like, you literally need to turn the car around, and like, you're gonna have to grieve on Zoom or like by phone, and it's hard, right? And so I think in general, we need to prioritize mental health across the board. But for trauma survivors, especially on FGM, donors, like funders, need to, when we're doing storytelling interventions, there has to be a clinician that's trained, like a trauma informed, to be there, because you don't know what the consequences will be for someone, or how their family might react to it, or community members, and the backlash they might feel later. So I think, Imam Majid, your point about a holistic approach, and Angela as well, your work on the legislation in Virginia is a model really for state legislation, because it's holistic. It's not just the punitive part, but it's the resources for survivors, both on the education, but also on the mental health and the holistic form of it. So I think it's just paramountly important. I mean, it's just, everybody's been echoing the same thing, but that piece in particular tends to get lost when we look at the healthcare kind of perspective, which is critical, but the mental health part is equally, if not more. I mean, the damage is something, and it affects everyone in different ways. So I think that's also important. So really, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Miriam, about the psychological effect. That's why my organization places emphasis on the support group that we have for survivors, exclusively for FGM survivors, because like you said, every story, I listen to every woman's story who comes to us, and every story is different, and it affects every single woman differently in her own way. And that's why psychological help is so important to the survivors.
I just wanted to, just to clarify things, because I just realized that I don't want anyone to misunderstanding when I mention those scholars' names. I just want them to be, inshallah, being invited to a forum like this. I don't like to be only the imam of the FGM, that who condemn it and so forth, because I heard them. I heard each one of those imam speaking against FGM. I know their positions. Yes, I want to tell the Muslim community that we have great Muslim scholars in America who have the same position that I have, and just maybe some of them not have heard them. Just want to mention that.
Thank you, Majid, for clarifying that, and definitely uplifting the other imams that are doing the work. The more imams that are doing the work is definitely what we want to hear, for sure. So thank you for sharing that.
I think that's a really good new title for you, the FGM Imam.
FGM prevention imam.
That's right. Matter. That's right.
We have another question here from Paulette, who says, how do we get over the fact that stigma against uncut girls, especially in schools, drives the uncut girls to get cut so they fit in? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I think this is that social norms. Everybody thinks everybody else is doing it. We see this with so many things. But if we don't have people speaking out and changing the norms of FGMC, then people are going to think, well, if I don't have it, everyone else does, and vice versa. We need to be saying that this is a form of abuse. This is not a rite of passage. That all of us need to be communicating this message, whether it's teachers, religious leaders, community members, and listen to survivors. I really want to make sure that we put that first and foremost. Those voices are so important, because it is not just a little prick or a little pin stick or whatever it is. Girls are, make no mistake, girls are not consenting. They are not assenting to this. They are Think about it. If you have a daughter, you are a young girl, somebody takes you, they pull your pants, your skirt down and touch your genitals without any harm. That's abuse. That we condone it in any form, we cannot. So in terms of then talking about it, listening to survivors, realizing that it can have long-term impacts, not being secret. Because if we think everybody else is doing it, but they're not, we're perpetuating that myth. So it is so important to have all of us be speaking out and dispelling those myths and changing the social norms.
I think that question also, just to build on what you just said, it is true in society where there's women being cut and other women are being cut, or girls. The society creates a stigma saying that if a woman not being cut does not fulfilling the Sharia or the Islamic obligation, she does not follow the tradition, and they use very offensive description of those women. And you have to know, and because of that, parents says, I don't like my daughter to be called that, therefore I have to practice, or you have to apply, or you have to do this to her. I would like just to say to any little girls who's listening, or a family, if somebody were to call you names because you have refused, or the family refused to practice that, say to them, I would like to be like Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet. I want to be like the daughter of the Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, peace be upon him. That's in the discussions. Therefore, it's very important that to not have that pressure on those families and girls. But there's something also psychological aspect of this. The girls who that we practice on them, they wanted to defend, or the culture to defend what happened to them. Their parents want to defend what they done to them by telling them this meant to honor you. They use this to, just like an abusive husband who said to his wife, if you obey me, God will be pleased with you, that if you do everything, and if you don't give me the physical relationship that I need anytime, I ask for it, angel will curse you. Like he will use religion to manipulate his wife. The same thing people use this to manipulate young girls, to tell them you're being honored actually having this. And the people who don't have it, they are unclean, all kind of, because I heard, unfortunately, a guy in Sudan make a video promoting the FGM and saying that women who is not doing it, they will not consider them honorable in society. That's a very dangerous narrative. We cannot accept that. That is manipulating people. Therefore, we have to push against it, and to, like the Prophet did, to flip this whole argument to say, no, you are not honoring your daughters, because you don't also be careful to condemn the survivor. You have to be very careful in your language, that you have to address the wrongdoing and empowering the survivor. And therefore, it's not their mistake that been done to them. They've been forced into it. Therefore, that's a very important in discourse, that we use a very sensitive language in addressing this issue.
I want to thank you, Majid, for sharing this. And I know we are actually 1 minute away from closing. I know we have a lot of questions coming in. So if all the panels are open to, I'm going to share your email addresses in the comments so people can contact you for follow-up if they have further questions. So if you're okay with that, let me know. And I'll drop it here soon. And then we have one question. This question actually was sent to us before this panel started. So I want to kind of make sure we have a chance to kind of answer this one. And they're asking, does any of the panelists know details of the indictment for vacation cutting that happened recently in Houston? So anyone who wants to answer that question, please take this time to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's an ongoing case, so it hasn't been resolved yet, but I think it's another hopeful sign of accountability. Like what we talked about earlier, it's we can talk about this, but if there's no accountability for the actions, it's not. It sends a message that the laws are sort of, they're symbolic, right? And we want to make sure that there's some gravity, and for hopefully we'll get to a point where we don't need the laws are there, but people will feel like Imam Majid and others have talked about, like it's who wants to harm their child, right? Like nobody really wants to do that. Even in my own community, there's so much pressure to do it. And to end sort of on a hopeful note, I would say that the raising awareness on this and in the sort of me sharing my story created a snowball effect where others shared their stories, and it became this sort of movement. And one in particular, I mean, I think I shared my story back in early 2016, literally to the day, because it was the International Day to End FGM. So every February 6th, it's commemorated with the UN. And I remember somebody reached out to me. It was like on, I think, Facebook has those like messages of people you don't know. So somebody had reached out to me on that, and I happened to check it, and it was a girl also in my community, survivor from Texas, where I'm from, and actually went to the same university. So it was very interesting. We had all these parallel connections. And she said, I went through FGM. I'm grateful for you speaking out. Unfortunately, I'll never be able to share my story because, just the community, it's just too much. And, I think we added each other on Facebook sort of as friends or whatever. And then a few months later, I see some familiar name, and I was like, how do I know this person? And sure enough, her face, I wasn't even ready to put my face to this. I just wrote a text of like, here's what happened, and kind of cathartically released it, right, and into this newspaper. But this person actually was interviewed in the New York Times, front page of the health section, with her face, right, with her portrait, talking about the Detroit case. And so for someone, who was, it just shows that you don't even know the impact like that you might be having. Like you speaking out could be having this ripple effect. And Imam Majid and others, Angela, Karen, Ghada, Khadijah, like all of these micro interventions that you have could be having this kind of butterfly effect. And so I think it's really important. And I have to remind myself of that, because there are moments where I feel like I'm beating my head against a brick wall. Like, why are we, I was sending links in this, in our personal, so we have a speaker chat of, we've done this before. We've had this conversation before. We've had religious leaders come out. Everyone you mentioned, Imam Majid, has spoken out before. And so how do we really elevate those voices? But really, this is a moment. I think it's a pandemic. It's been a disruptive moment. There's so much, and we just need to kind of accelerate this, because we can keep having this cycle, and I could keep speaking every February. I hope for next year and years beyond, there won't even be a need for this. So that's kind of I feel like we're getting there. We're getting there, and through the education, through all of this. But I think the work, Imam Majid, that you're doing, and Khadijah in particular with the toolkit, has the potential to be an accelerator to get to that change. So let's hope that we can all get there. And so grateful for all of you. I feel so uplifted after this.
I'm grateful for you too, Miriam. I'm grateful for everyone on this space and sharing their, just sharing everything. So I wanted to take a chance again to say some final words before we close up. Any more questions? If you can't do any more, I'm so sorry, but I dropped everyone's email and name in the comments. So if you have all questions, please email whoever you would like to ask your questions. But from the panelists, any last comments or thoughts before we close?
So I just want to thank you, Khadijah, for what you have done, and so to Ghada, to Mariam, to Karen, and to Angela, all of you, for enlightening the community with your wonderful presentation, but also creating this toolkit that's going to help imams, religious leaders, faith leaders, community leaders, because now we have no excuse. You have resource in your hand to become an advocate and to speak up against this issue.
Inshallah. All right, I think we're good. So thank you everybody for tuning in on a Saturday. We appreciate it. I have really consistent amount of people engaged throughout the whole time. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you again. And please start having these conversations if you're not having them. If you are, please continue having them and raising awareness and protecting our women and girls. Thank you, and have a wonderful Saturday. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Khadijah.